All right. Welcome to the No Trade Clause podcast. We have a very special guest, our first guest on the podcast, Eric Pinkus. He's a capologist, a writer, also an instructor over at Bleacher Report, Sports Business Classroom, and Basketball Insiders as well, and NBA TV. And then along with us, we have Chanel joining us. She's also a co-founder, just like me, of No Trade Clause, a contributor. She leads our writing segment, and I work on the writing segment with her as well. So, and happy to have you, Eric, on the podcast. So excited for this.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm happy to see your faces. Let's do it. I've got my Sports Business Classroom shirt on. I still have the banner up from our most recent class, and I figured, why not? Let's do it.
That's absolutely awesome. So before we dive into what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk, pretty much we're going to dive into how the Hawks and the Knicks are having a surge and how they've done in the months of April. And with the Hawks, they've kind of been streaking for a little longer than that. So we're going to talk about what they're doing on the court. We're going to talk about what they're going to be doing off the court, potentially with some salary cap decisions coming up this offseason, recent play, and then maybe possible path towards contention. As you can see, they're going to be fighting for the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference. So a team that can maybe take that next leap. We can maybe start to outline what a potential leap might look like on the court and then off the court. And then we're going to have some, observations and stuff as the season winds down. So with the Hawks or with the Knicks, for example, they're 9-1 in their last 10 games. They're 34-28, currently 4th in the Eastern Conference, tied with the Atlanta Hawks. 20th in the offensive rating. In the last 10 games, they've been 11th, 4th in defensive rating currently, 11th in their last 10 games, 9th in net rating, and 2nd in their last 10 games, which is really, really impressive. And in their last 10 games, they've also been 3rd in true shooting. So really, really hot shooting so far, especially from the 3-point line. So Eric and Shana, I wanted to ask you guys, what are you guys' quick hitting observations so far in terms of on the court, and what have you seen so far?
Chanel, go ahead.
All right. Well, I will just definitely say I have really enjoyed watching the Knicks play this year. I really think that Thibs has done a really good job with the team overall. Just kind of, it's like night and day from last year to this year. I did not at all think that the Knicks would be in playoff contention at all, period. So I'm really, really happy for them. They've got a really great front office. And I'm just excited to see Julius Randle. I think that he is an obvious choice for most improved player. Going back and forth with Jeremy Grant, but they're just really doing some phenomenal things. And then even just with their talent coming up, I just am really excited to see what's going on out there.
Well, I'll say on the Knicks, I was at Julius's draft workout with the Lakers. They let us in and let us see a little bit more of his workout than they usually do. We would see maybe the last 5-10 minutes, and usually just drills. But for whatever reason, they let us see a little bit more of Julius, and he was going up against Mark Madsen. Mark is a former Laker, was an assistant on the staff. And Mark is a big dude, big, strong guy. He's not the tallest guy in the league, maybe like 6'9", but he was always really physically strong. He didn't have a lot of skill, but he had a lot of effort and a lot of body. And he was having a hard time dealing with Julius. And so, Julius, from that moment on, I was just talking to him, really liked his personality. I was at his draft introduction, like after they drafted him. His mom was there, and I got a real quick sense of who Julius was and his respect for his mother and what she provided for him to get to that point, and how much pride he took in taking it to the next level and kind of repaying those debts to his, to his mother, to those who got him to this point. And then I was at the game when right off the bat, he broke his leg, first game out for the year. And it was a tough go for him, but he came in a big guy, but he had certain attributes that were very good and some that were not as good. And people would say, "Oh, you don't have a right hand," but how many times do you say like a guy with a right hand doesn't use their left? We don't talk about that. But Julius has become a much better shooter. He didn't set screens well when he came in, and when he played in Kobe's farewell game, I was there for that. He set like the hardest, most vicious screens that he'd ever set. He didn't screen all season until that last game. And after the game, I asked him, is this how you're going to be screening? You're going to finally be putting some bodies out. And he's like, no. If I screen like that, I'm going to foul out in like 5 minutes. And I said, well, it's an improvement though. So he's kind of found a way. And there was a year before the Lakers sort of transitioned to what they've become, which is great for the Lakers. Where they let Julius really run the show. And he played a point forward kind of role for the team. And then the next year, his last year with the team, they'd kind of moved away from that because they'd gotten, different pieces. But when they let Julius be Julius, you could see like he busted his butt playing defense. He could run a team. Now, he made a lot of mistakes. He was younger then. And then he went off to New Orleans, played well there, and then ended up in New York. And his first year, they didn't have a good chemistry. The team was put together poorly. It had a lot of power. It had like 4 or 5 power forwards. It was just not a good team yet. And they didn't have the right coach, and they were sort of in transition. And for him to kind of bounce back and to take ownership and to find that kind of chemistry with Thibodeau, where he's able, I think Tibbs trusts Julius to run the team. As long as Julius is going to play defense the way that Tibbs wants him to. Like, I'm going to let you run the team, you run the offense, play my defense. And I love coaches when they do that. Frank Vogel does that with the Lakers this year, right? Or even the last couple of years. Coaches that love defense, that empower their players to do their thing and don't micromanage them, I think is a really positive combination if you have the right players. I think Tibbs in Minnesota didn't have that. It was just the wrong mix of players. But here, he's letting Julius be Julius. I'm so happy for him because I was there when, obviously not in the hospital, but I was there when he had his kid. And, I was in the locker room, and I of course, have 3 daughters. And so watching him be a father and how much love he had, at least when he was in LA, and you could see it from his social media from afar. I'm in LA, so he's in New York. It's inspiring. I love a story where somebody isn't reaching their potential and is looked upon as somebody who was underperforming, who overcomes that and shows like, I can shoot, I can play, I can win. And he's doing it on a Knicks team that on paper, it's not great. They shouldn't be as good as they are. And that's what team basketball is about, is it's being better than the individual pieces coming together as a unit. So can't speak highly enough of what Julius has done. The Knicks have a great chemistry this year. They're obviously on the right path. And as we get into the next phase of the conversation, they have a lot of flexibility when it comes to what's next for the team.
Yeah, absolutely. As someone who has an affinity for large, big forwards who could pass, shoot, dribble, do, all sorts of stuff. Lamar Odom is like my favorite player of all time. So, I've loved Randall and his game, and I mean, he's shooting 41% from 3. He's taking 5.3 attempts per game. He's scoring in the post with not a lot of shooting around him. And I feel like an unsung hero of that team has been, someone like Reggie Bullock, who has been able to space the floor. RJ Barrett has been spacing the floor as well with his improved shooting. Hopefully that can last as well. So they're one of the teams they are the team with the most cap space in the league, with 72.8 million of max cap room available. Julius Randle has it. Yes.
I'm not sure it gets that high. But anyway, I think it's close to that. I think they got to keep some of the pieces they have. I don't think they'll get to that number, but go on. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good. They just have a lot of decisions. A lot of the players that are currently in the rotation are going to be, restricted or unrestricted free agents, as Ntilikina, who hasn't played much, Derrick Rose, Alec Burks, Nerlens Noel, who has been a big part of the the defensive effort, especially with Mitchell Robinson, who we'll touch on later, who has a very unique, situation with his unrestricted and restricted free agency decisions that the Knicks might make. Alfred Payton is also going to be an unrestricted free agent. So, Reggie Bullock, Taj Gibson, Norwood Pell, and then also obviously Mitchell Robinson. So in terms of the cap moving forward, how do you guys see the Knicks kind of outlining their offseason decisions? Do you guys think that they might make a splurge in the offseason? Do you guys think that they're going to bring a lot of these guys back? They might be able to do both. What do you guys think, Eric?
Let Chanel. I'm long-winded. I want to hear what Chanel has to say.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that I think that the way things are right now, I think that their philosophy may be, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, they're doing pretty good. I think that there's always room to add, another piece or two, certainly. But I feel like they're in a really good spot right now, competing for the fourth. And I think for the future, they're in a development stage. They have a lot of young guys. And so, next year, it's going to be a big year. And certainly we'll see what the summer looks like in terms of whether, off-season programs will be traditional, because it's going to be a consolidated summer from what I'm hearing, because the league kind of wants to get back to normal. So we'll see kind of what happens, but I really don't think that there will be a lot of moves. I definitely don't think that they'll pay Ntilikina, his, cap holds or restricted free agent amount, or I don't even think that they will extend a qualifying offer to him. I think they'll just kind of see, how he does over the summer and maybe give him, maybe a minimum or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's fair that they won't give their qualifying offer. If they offered him, let's say 8.3 million is required to make him restricted, he would be a fool not to accept that immediately. And then now the Knicks have eaten up 8.3 million of their money. That's unnecessary when I don't know if Ntilikina is going to be in the league next year. And I think he will. I think he'll get a shot. I think a team will want to see up close what he can be, and maybe they can develop him, but not at that price. And so, the Knicks are guaranteed to make changes because there's so much money that they have to spend. I mean, where's that money going to go? And so, you have to ask, are they a rebuilding team? Well, no, they're past rebuilding, right? This is a team that is now a playoff team. Are they a contending team? And that's a stretch to say that they're at the level of the Lakers, the Clippers, the Nets, the Bucks, the Sixers. We could talk about, I'm leaving out a team or two, no, not slighting anybody, but I suppose I should say Utah, given they have the best record in the league. But I'm not, this is about the Knicks, and I don't know if they're at that level, and I don't know if they believe that they're at that level. I don't think they should believe that they're at that contending level. And they probably want to get to that, right? If everyone wants to be at that level, the question is can they get to that contending level this summer? Can they do it quickly? And can they keep the core bits that they like and still go out and spend some money? And so Randall only has a certain amount of his contract guaranteed, but it's a lock that they'll keep him, right? So that's $19.8 million. So that's when you say like $70-something million, they're not going to cut Julius Randle. So we got to slice that off the top. And then Robinson, you mentioned that he has an interesting situation. It's true. He has a team option, which is only 1.8 million. And you say, well, why wouldn't the Knicks just opt him in and pay him very little? That's a very low contract for a guy who's very solid. And the answer is, well, if you opt him in and then he hits unrestricted free agency the next year, then he can leave. Whereas if you opt him out, you can put him into restricted free agency, try to work a multi-year deal, and worst comes to worst, he signs this qualifying offer. He's back basically at the same amount of money as it would have been anyway, give or take. And so now you could lose him in a year, but at least if you opt him out, you have that possibility. And so I do expect that they probably will opt him out and they will make him restricted and probably work to keep him unless they're looking to trade him. And I don't know that they are. I'm just saying, if you want to trade him, you would opt him in. And I think that's, I can make an argument that they could look to make a big trade. With all their cap room, they can make trades without matching salaries. So, but if you want to get someone really good, you probably got to send something out of value. And so I don't know if someone like Kevin Knox has any real trade value. I don't think he's done enough. We said Ntilikina is expiring. Obviously, a guy like RJ Barrett would have some value, but that now you're saying, well, do you want to change your core? Are you saying Julius and Barrett are two core pieces? And looking at this team, like, I guess quickly, I mean, who else? That's what's so unique about this team. I don't even know, like, who are they building around outside of Julius? Because a lot of these pieces aren't like necessarily like, I love Reggie and I think he should be back, but he's not going to be that expensive. And he's not somebody you're probably going to be like, oh yeah, next 5 years, we need to have Reggie Bullock. Same, Taj is a nice, Noel, all these guys, bringing them back. The Knicks have the money. They can easily bring back all these guys. Still going to have a ton of money to spend. And so now you say, well, what are they missing? I think they can upgrade at the Elfrid
Point
Payton
guard
spot.
for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a bunch of low-hanging fruit there.
Yeah. So when you start saying, well, you want to upgrade, that's a ball handling guard position, right? So Julius, in a sense, is almost a ball handling guard. He's really a big power forward, but Ben Simmons, LeBron, those are primary initiators, and Julius is kind of that. But you may want to give Julius some help in that front. And when you start going down the list of ball handling guards, the top one out there is potentially Chris Paul, who I have long said I think ends up on the Knicks. And most people look at me like I'm crazy when I say that. I'll get into that in a minute. Kyle Lowry, Mike Conley, all three a bit older. Then there's a younger guy in Lonzo Ball, who is a restricted free agent. And then it's like Dennis Schroeder with the Lakers. And we get to like Spencer Dinwiddie, who's hurt. Don't know how he'll be after. He's got a player option with the Nets. Young guy like Devontae Graham. I don't know if, with Charlotte restricted, don't know if that solves the problem. Guys like TJ McConnell, Alex Caruso are more like role players. Lou Williams is older. The quality gets closer to Elfrid Payton level really quickly. Talen Horton-Tucker with the Lakers is a neat young player, restricted. There's a limit to what the Knicks could offer to steal him away, but they have that power to try to make some plays. But Chris is one of those unique situations where, yeah, he should stay in Phoenix. Of course he should stay in Phoenix. They're arguably the best team in the West by the time this thing is over, right? I don't know. Do they catch Utah? Maybe, maybe not. And we're talking record. I'm not saying playoffs, but like regular season, they may end up with the best record overall. Chris has a $44 million player option. So you're like, well, he's not going to opt out. He's crazy if he opt out. Well, we said the same thing about Gordon Hayward, and yet he did opt out of a big contract, despite being a player who's over 30, who's had a lot of injuries in his career. And Chris is older, but he has had some injuries, but he's been healthy, and he's done wonders with the Suns. He's done wonders with the Thunder. He was great with the Rockets before things kind of fell apart. So you say like, well, Hayward got, what did he get? He got like
4 years,
120 million.
Yeah.
So
he might opt for that long-term security.
If you're Chris Paul, if you can get from the Knicks $100 million over 3 years, right? Now, if the Suns will give it to him, fine, stay in Phoenix. But do they? They have to pay Ayton soon. They have to pay Bridges soon. They could probably afford 1 year of Chris Paul at a big dollar. But then after that, are they going to go into the tax? Team that doesn't go into the tax. Maybe they will. Maybe that's changed. Maybe now that they're contending, theoretically, maybe that's changed. And so I'm not going to say, I don't want Phoenix Suns fans ripping me saying, oh, I'm hating on the Suns. I don't hate on anybody. I'm just saying maybe he stays with the Suns. I think that the Suns should keep him, but based on the history of the Suns, I don't know that they keep him. And there's one last element to kind of wrap up this long answer. Who was Chris Paul's agent for a very long time? Leon Rose. Who runs the Knicks? Leon Rose, right? Chris Paul is still with CAA. That's who he some people will tell you that CAA runs the Knicks. I don't know I think that's an overstatement, but I do know that they have a strong relationship because the people at CAA were, a lot of them, brought into the industry or developed in the industry, mentored by Leon Rose. So those relationships don't evaporate because he's in a different position. And I may be speaking out of turn, and maybe they don't even want Chris Paul. I don't know. But when I look at it and I say, okay, you've got a team that's on the borderline of contending, and you can add Chris Paul to that, and they need a point guard, and they have the money, and 33 million, yeah, it's 100 million for a guy who's a little bit older. But if you believe in Chris Paul, and I got to think that Leon Rose believes in Chris Paul, to me, it's like it's going to happen. It's like it makes all the sense in the world. There's no, it's all speculation. It's my gut feeling saying it's going to happen. Like I said, I think the Suns should keep him, and I think he'd be open to staying. But then I watched that game the other day, and Chris hit some mighty big game-winning shots, and I'm like, Chris wants to be in New York. That's my gut. That's where I see him next year. So to answer your question, I think a big chunk of that money, but not all of it, goes to Chris Paul, which leaves the dangling question of where the rest of that money goes. So I've put some thought into that too, but I'll breathe for a minute and let you guys chew on that a bit.
So last year I was very fascinated with the potential fit of Fred VanVleet in a Knicks uniform, and I thought that might have been a possibility. Obviously, that didn't happen. I think realistically speaking, during this offseason, I think Kyle Lowry and the Knicks are going to have some mutual interest. I'd love to see Chris Paul there, and I think there's a part of Chris Paul that would love to play in the Garden. Obviously, he's been making his way into the MVP conversation. He's still an All-NBA guard, which is incredible at his age. But I think when I take a step back and think about where the Raptors are going, where Kyle Lowry is going, obviously he would want to be with a contender, and I don't see the Knicks contending in the offseason. But I think their offseason, I think for so many years now, the Knicks have been in this situation where, where they haven't really had a team to show off to the free agent class. Like you have a hardworking team now that is enticing to, star free agents. And unfortunately, this offseason, a lot of the free agents that we were expecting to be on, to be unrestricted are no longer there. So we have a much weaker free agent class. But I think realistically speaking, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see Kyle Lowry in a Knicks uniform, for sure.
Interesting. And I'll say that, okay, if you're going to go with an older point guard, are you going to go to the one that you didn't represent for X amount of years? You have a very, very, very close relationship to this day. I think that those kind of relationships trump like what should make sense from a basketball point of view.
Yeah.
I think
that's how Derrick Rose ended up in Detroit, because of Arn Cullen.
Yeah. That's not even a little bit how that happened. That's the story behind that is that the basketball operations staff spent the amount of time that it takes to prepare for the offseason. And when they got to their meeting to discuss what the plans would be, they were told that we've agreed to give Derrick Rose this amount of money. This is how much you have left over to spend. So that didn't even go through the basketball operations department. That was done by the top decider without even telling them, until it was like, you could have told us that like before the summer started that this was going to happen, or at least tell us it was in play. So yeah, the agent side of things, the Lakers are the ultimate expression of that, right? Like they got Kentavious Caldwell-Pope when they were bad, and that brought Rich Paul into the circle. So I'd see him sitting with Jeannie Buss at Laker games, and it's not like LeBron didn't already want to come. He did want to come, but he needed to have an impression and an understanding of who the Lakers were, because there was a lot of drama back then. Jeannie and her brother were having problems. Then Jeannie took over, and then Magic and Rob took over, and Magic had a lot of trouble working within the lines of the rules. And that's not to criticize what he did as a top basketball guy, but he tampered. He was on Jimmy Kimmel's doing the things that Magic did were very difficult for him. Magic is very Magic. He's unique, and he's going to be himself. And you can't be yourself in this job. You have to follow the restrictions. You can't speak freely. You just can't. If you're running a team, you can't speak freely. You can't. It's, Daryl Morey learned that, right? A very difficult lesson for a lot of people in the NBA. NBA lost a lot of money because of that. And so LeBron was comfortable, saw like, okay, Rich Paul saw, no, Jeannie's good people, and I know Jeannie pretty well, not as well as others, but you talk to Jeannie, you feel like really good about. I mean, she's like a great person to talk to. She's really passionate about what she does, and has a lot of reverence for her father, who changed the way sports and entertainment work together. And I have a lot of respect for her. And when you talk to her and you get to know her, you probably feel that. And Rob Pelinka knows how to work with superstars, right? He was Kobe's agent, James Harden's agent, and Magic's Magic, right? So it became an easy decision for LeBron. And then LeBron begat AD, right? Anthony Davis. Meanwhile, you also have Talen Horton-Tucker, who's with Clutch. You have a long list. Montrezl Harrell needed a spot to land.
Markieff, I believe,
right,
as well.
Right. Like even Dion Waiters, Ben McLemore, I'm forgetting J.R. Smith. Like, I mean, literally, there's probably 2 or 3 other guys that I just overlooked. That's the agent game. And by the way, the Lakers didn't work it out with Julius. Like, he's with CAA, surprise, right? CAA connection, right? He's with CAA, and D'Angelo Russell is with CAA. I haven't checked. I believe he still is. Yeah. And the Lakers didn't want those guys. They had their sights on bigger players. So they traded D'Angelo. And then Julius wanted to stay, and they had a very reasonable path to him staying. And the Lakers weren't interested because they had bigger sights. They were trying to get LeBron and probably Paul George at that point, and had some backup plans. And the Lakers didn't have a great moment with CAA in those 2 years in a row. And guess what? Now they don't have a lot of luck when it comes to going to get Paul George later, right? Like, when you're trying to get CAA clients, you may not get them if you're the Lakers, because they didn't work with the CAA clients. So that'll pass. You can't hold grudges in this league too long. But I look at the Knicks and I see that connection, and it makes me think, okay, who else is on CAA? Just like I think Corey Joseph, if the Pistons don't hold on to him because he's partially guaranteed, he's on Clutch. Lakers could use a vet backup point guard next year. Watch, Corey Joseph ends up on the Lakers. That's, he maybe doesn't happen, but like, that's my analysis, because it makes sense, right? And I'm applying that same logic to CAA. And then then you start getting me going, and I'm like, well, who else is on CAA? And then you're like, well, actually, Cat is on CAA, and Gerson is on CAA of the Timberwolves, the GM, and they're selling the team, and that team's kind of a mess. I don't know about Cat. I'm looking into Cat and seeing, how comfortable he is, but that team's a mess. Yeah. You start to think like, maybe the Knicks start to look around there and see what kind of trade options they have. But that's a bit,
I'm actually glad you brought that up, because a candidate that I was thinking was Miles Turner. I feel like they'd love someone like a floor spacing 5 who could, block shots, fortify the defense and from the interior. And the Pacers, I feel like, have been a bit wishy-washy with their Sabonis and Turner front court. They've been kind of unsure about that. So maybe they might, maybe the Knicks poke around and see what the asking price is like. The Knicks are able to, do an lopsided trade. And I'm glad you brought up the agent thing, because Mitchell Robinson is on his 6th agent, I believe. So
yeah.
So I think they'll come to an agreement, because not only has he dealt with injuries, he's dealt with another injury now, which was almost season ending, but he might be available right before to come back right before the playoffs, which will be nice. So I think him entering restricted free agency, I think reassessing where his career has gone and how much he has been able to show. Obviously, he has an incredible amount of potential, but I think they'll be able to get a deal done, and he'll be able to recoup some of the money because of the fact that he fell to the second round. So
absolutely. Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense. He's got a low number. He doesn't impact their cap negatively. I think it's worth saying that we don't know what's going to happen with Kawhi Leonard. When you start going down the list of free agents, you start at the top. If you're the Knicks, if you're anybody and you have the money, you don't start at the bottom and say, let's fill out the role players. Let's go get the best players in the league. Absolutely. And as you said, now that they're showing signs of life and that they're not a disaster, which, they had a rough go, because that's what happens. You unfortunately, their ups weren't up enough. And then after an up cycle, you have a down cycle. And unfortunately, going through the Phil Jackson era was a difficult transition. It didn't ultimately bear fruit quickly. But then Phil didn't trade away a bunch of picks, and they still have, they're in a better situation. So, let's look at the positive. They're moving in the right direction, so they could be attractive. And we mentioned like ball handling guards. Those were the best names, and I think making a stab at Lonzo might fit the age profile a little better. But then he's more of a role player. It's debatable how if you say who's a better player, Chris Paul or Lonzo Ball, it's going to be Chris Paul. And you have the agent connection. I think Dennis Schroeder is a nice kind of half measure where you're getting a younger guy. He's not young, but he's also. But again, I go back to the agent connection. But then when you look at the other positions, like when you look at wings, Kawhi is easily atop the list, and then it's like DeMar DeRozan. Oladipo has questionable health. I don't know if the Knicks should be spending their money right now on a guy who's got a questionable situation.
Right.
Then it quickly goes to like Norman Powell's and Duncan Robinson. Good players. Oubre, Gary Trent. Some are restricted, some are not. Like, but Tim Hardaway Jr. if he opts out. Like, no, I think he's already passed that option. Yeah, he's a free agent. So, I don't know if any of those guys after Kawhi are the right guy. Maybe DeMar, you can argue it. I'm not going to put that on the Knicks because he's a very good player, but then he's also not a shooter, and Randall's not a shooter. Well, Randall is a shooter now, but he needs to play with shooters. If he's going to be the guy driving, and then you need to put shooters around him. And I don't know if DeMar is that guy, but I don't know where the Knicks are on that. But what's unique about, I don't know about unique, but what's interesting about Kawhi is he's kind of in the same spot that Chris Paul was in with the Clippers a couple years back, where Chris had a player option and he decided, and he told them, I'm leaving. I'm going to the Rockets. If you'd like to trade me to the Rockets, even better, right? And so that's how they got Lou Williams. They got Montrezl Harrell. They got a few other pieces as well, Patrick Beverly, etc. Right. And the Clippers may win the title, but they also may fall apart, just like they did in the bubble. And so if they do, maybe Kawhi wants to stay home. Maybe that's why he went to the Clippers, to stay home, and maybe that passion to be home trumps anything. And maybe he's happy being a Clipper for the next 5-10 years, maybe.
Right.
Or maybe he's moves on. He's a weird, I'm not in a negative way, but he's a weird guy. Like, he doesn't communicate well with the media. I don't know how he does privately, but I know people who have tried to deal with them on a business level, and it's been a lot of question marks where they've been very uneasy. The Lakers didn't know that they were never really in the running. The Raptors didn't know where Kawhi was going to go. The Spurs went through it and had their troubles, right? So if Kawhi is leaving, then the Knicks have to be at that table with either cap room or willing to do a trade with the Clippers, because that might be a better situation for Kawhi and it might be better if he opts in. It might be, given that the Knicks have cap room, it's less important. But if Kawhi Kawhi can go to any team in the league he wants to, if that team's going to give the Clippers something that makes it worthwhile to do a trade. Because they'd lose him otherwise. He's like, I'll go to the Knicks or trade me to the team X. And so I have no idea what he does, but I find it fascinating. And then you mentioned Miles Turner. The Pacers are unequivocally looking to move Miles Turner. They have been for about a year and a half or about a year. And it just they've come close a couple of times, almost for Hayward. And then they looked at moves at the deadline and it didn't happen. So
would have loved to see him in New Orleans, but hey, that's another story.
So, you look at the Knicks and you say, is Duncan Robinson enough? Mitchell Robinson. Is he enough? Is Nerlens Noel back enough? Do you want role players there? And do you want to put your money into a point guard and a big wing? I mean, if you can get Kawhi and Chris Paul, then all you need is role players. But barring that, there's certainly the possibility. But again, it's a lot easier when you have a ton of cap room to just pay players than it is to go to a team and say, okay, we'll trade here. Now we've got to give you something. And when you look at what the Knicks have, it's like Obi Toppin. Maybe you can argue that he certainly has upside value, but draft picks are like used cars. You pull them off the lot and they're not worth as much as they are, because they go from being a prospect with a ton of potential to seeing a year of like, oh, they're really far away. Well, guess what? Almost all first round picks are really far away, and big guys especially are further away typically. And
unfortunately,
so,
with him, he stayed in college for I believe all 4 years. So
right, so he's a little bit older.
An older guy. Yeah.
So how big is that upside? And look, I like Obi. I'm not in any way speaking poorly of him. I'm
Right.
just saying I don't know if that's enough for these teams. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. The Knicks don't have to match salary, but I think the Knicks are very fond of the pick that they found in quickly and are less than eager to move him. Is my estimation, not my knowledge,
Absolutely.
but I believe
Yeah.
that they would want to. And he's probably the guy that you would probably want because he's the one who's shown a lot more quickly. Sorry, and like RJ Barrett has had a great sophomore year, and so again, like if you're the Knicks, can you trade RJ Barrett to get an established win now player? Probably, but should you? I mean, he's a good player. He's developing maybe ahead of schedule. Right. So, breaking up the core doesn't necessarily, I don't think Obi Toppin is in the core of how they're winning now. You could say quickly is, right? You could say Robinson is on the edge of that. And maybe trading Robinson, I mentioned that before. Maybe you opt him in and you trade him. And that's how you get a guy like Miles Turner, because again, they don't have to match salary. You could do straight up Robinson and Obi for Miles Turner. And that's a legal trade for the Knicks if they are using cap room. And I'm not saying that this shouldn't be a rumor. This is just me looking at the math. Knox is sort of, I don't know if he has value, which is a shame because he's a good kid. But I don't know if he's played himself into value in trade for the Knicks. So they don't really have a lot to offer when it comes to actual players outside of Obi. And assuming that they're not trading Barrett, assuming that they're not giving up quickly, there's not a lot that they would have to offer. And they, to kind of wrap that point, they do have their own first, which appears to be a non-lottery pick. They do have the Mavs first, which also I expect the Mavericks to make the playoffs. So they have two picks that'll probably be anywhere from 15 to 20, give or take. So that's valuable. Two firsts in this draft, I think, would be valuable. How valuable? It's not like a number 1 or a number 5 pick in this draft. And then they also have Dallas's pick in 2023, has some protections, and then they have all of their own firsts. So they have some draft capital. But is that enough to get a Miles Turner? You could argue you might be able to get Miles Turner with some combination of Obi and picks, and maybe need to throw in Robinson, but it's hard to say. And if you're the Pacers, maybe Robinson only holds so much value because he wants to get a new contract, and you're paying Sabonis, and you just want to go from one situation where you're paying two centers to another.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
Is Obi really the guy when you have Sabonis? Is he a good fit with Sabonis? But then he's cheap young talent, relatively speaking. So these are the kind of questions that Pacers are going to have to deal with when it comes to scouring the league for all options. And the Knicks will have to go through to figure out what they want to do, who's available, who's not a part of their future core. I'm speculating that RJ and quickly stick, and maybe they view differently. I don't know. But I think I'm right. But again, there's what's great is we have months to find out, and then we find out because they make the moves, and we'll know sooner or later. People say you never know. Well, no, we do know. We'll know in when free agency hits. That's not never. That's only a few months away. So August is when it is. So we'll know soon.
Yeah. So yeah, you guys brought up great points about the Knicks. And we'll probably finish up with the Knicks and move on to the Hawks coming up. So, their fundamentals are pretty interesting. They're 7-3 in their last 10 games, 20-8 since McMillan replaced Lloyd Pierce, and they've been top 5 lost games due to injury or illness. So they've been a really injury-riddled and team that's had to deal with the health and safety protocols. Unfortunately, they're tied with the Knicks, like I said, 34-28, 4th in the West or East, excuse me, 10th in offensive rating overall, 12th in their last 10 games. They're 17th in defensive rating, 10th in their last 10 games. 11th in net rating and 9th in the last 10 games as well. They have a pretty easy remaining schedule, and they've been hot in their last 15 games, 11-4. Unfortunately, they've lost Trae Young to a grade 2 lateral ankle sprain, and that usually takes about 8 games. I believe Jeff Stotts from In Street Clothes was saying that it takes about 18 days or 8 games for that kind of recovery. Unfortunately, they lost DeAndre Hunter as well. So they've been and Cam Reddish as well. So they've been a very fascinating team with Bogdanovic coming back from injury and just has been shooting lights out. He's been playing really well off the bench and starting as well. When Trae Young is off the court, he's been able to hold those units offensively, and defensively they've been fine as well with Capella, protecting the rim and playing more in a drop scheme. In Houston, he was asked more to, switch and be more of a Swiss Army knife defensively. This year, this is the first time we're really seeing him play a lot more as a drop big. So that's been pretty fascinating. But with Gallo coming back as well, Chris Dunn making his season debut, they've been surging, and they've been still winning games with Trae Young as well. So I wanted to ask you, Chanel, what do you think about, moving into the offseason, or actually prior to that, they're fighting for the 4 seed, they're fighting with the Knicks for home court advantage. Do you think that the Hawks have enough noise to, and firepower to, make some real noise in the playoffs, especially in the first round?
I think if everyone was healthy, then I think that would be a definite yes. But with the injuries and them not having timetables on certain guys, I really think that I don't think that they'll make a ton of noise. Chris Dunn made his debut on Monday, and I think he's a little bit rusty, which is, expected, being out. But I mean, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But I really like John Collins, and I really like also Bogdan, and so we'll see. I guess it's too early to tell, but we'll see. But I don't think they'll make any noise.
Yeah, obviously they need Trae back. They need him at full strength. He's a special player. He's an all-star despite what happened this year. When everyone gets upset about snubs and everyone has their own personal outrage over who got snubbed, for me it was Trae Young. And I feel like there's a lot of people out there who, for whatever reason, because he's a high volume shooter, that maybe he's not the most efficient player. I love efficiency when you can get it, but I love winning more.
He's had a very fascinating year. He's taking less threes. He's taking 6 threes per game. He's taking a lot more floaters and a lot more mid-range shots. So he's been changing his shot profile a little bit. And, he's, like you said, been less efficient. But, I mean, they've been better as a team. And, I feel like he's been getting more shots in the flow of the offense. He's not forcing stuff up. I feel like prior to this year, he's had to, kind of force stuff up because the talent around him wasn't, as strong.
Yeah, no, I love efficiency. You want to strive to be efficient, but you need to win. And sometimes you need to win ugly. And I've seen the Hawks win a lot of ugly games where they're down and Trae does some magic in the last 5 minutes and hits shots and takes shots that normal people should not take, but then makes, you know what I mean? And he has a certain level of magic about his game, not Magic Johnson, just actual mystical magic. And it's fun. And that's wonderful. I'm thrilled for the Hawks to have a cornerstone point guard. What he's doing has transformed the team. Obviously, the coaching change. I don't know Lloyd Pierce well enough to I've only seen him in passing, but I have a better knowledge and understanding of Nate McMillan just from years of being around him. A little bit with Portland and guys who coach in the West, I get to see a little bit more under normal circumstances at Staples Center at this point. We're in the twilight zone, but so I know that Nate is he's the real deal. He is really serious about what he does, really intelligent, really passionate, but he's not a huge personality. He's not, and he's kind of bounced around a little bit in maybe too much for my taste. And he's been in situations where he's gotten the most a lot of the time out of less. You know what I mean? Has he been gifted Frank Vogel? I'm so happy for him and his success. And he proved in Indiana, he could get more out of a team that probably was less. And that team turned out to be really, really good. Then he got stuck in a really bad situation in Orlando, rebuilding. The people who hired him got fired right away. And that kind of, And then he gets in a situation in LA where he's got LeBron and AD, right? So in the case of Nate, he hasn't had some of those great breaks where he's like obviously coaching the best team in the league, and he did have some good runs in Portland specifically. So to get this opportunity, I hope this means he's their long-term coach and that he sticks long-term, because he's a great coach. And I think that with his playoff experience, the team has an advantage, but then their own inexperience outside of, obviously Gallinari has lots of experience. Lou Williams has experience. But who else has experience in the playoffs on this team? I mean, like Bogdanovich didn't go to the playoffs with the Kings.
Lou Williams?
Capella has a little. Yeah, Lou. I mentioned Lou, but like Hunter, if healthy, no. Snell has a little. Like Dunn, I mean, I don't remember if Dunn made it to the playoffs. Like, that's it. I'm looking Collins, no. Herter, no. Like, this is a team. Solomon Hill, yes. So, but like, I mean, that's like, saying the Lakers are going to go to the championship because of Jared Dudley. It's like, no. I mean, it's not Jared Dudley. I love Jared, but Solomon Hill is a good role player. That's great. You need good role players, but he's not going to be the reason why. So it's a very young team, and because of that, they're going to struggle. And if they get the Knicks, who in a lot of ways are young, because outside of, I mean, Julius, this would be new for him, and for the most part. And then Quickly and RJ, it's new. You do have a little bit more experience with Derrick Rose and some of the other pieces there who have gone a little deeper. But so I think there's some inexperience here. You got to get Trey healthy. Hunter would be extremely valuable. This is a guy who, at least in Hunter, has like NCAA deep championship level experience. So at least he brings that. So I'm pulling for the Hawks. I don't think they're they might be a second round team on matchup, especially if they get high enough, but I don't see them as like an Eastern Conference Finals team. I don't think they're close to that. But I'm happy for them. And like, they were supposed to be a playoff team this year. Like, I looked at them and I'm like, yeah, they are good enough to make the next step. And the East looks soft enough that they should. I didn't have that for the Knicks. I didn't have the Knicks as a playoff team. I thought that they would be average to mediocre, like better than last year, probably, maybe. And so I'm happy for them. I'm happy for the Hawks. Generally, I'm not a hater. I want to see success. You see these programs try to develop and try to make it work and figure it out. So I like where the Hawks are going. I don't know. I don't see them as a massive power, but they do have some interesting questions into the offseason. And I think that's probably where we're going to go next.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the big name, John Collins, he's going to be entering restricted free agency. I wanted to ask you guys, does he get the max, Chanel?
I think he does, but I don't know if it's with the Hawks. I think there are some other teams that maybe could use him, but I don't know if they max him out.
Interesting.
So, the challenge is there are some teams with cap room, but there aren't a ton of teams with cap room. And you start to look around, and number one, free agency used to last a little bit longer, maybe a week, or like it would take like a few days for the top free agent to decide, and then the next 2 or 3 guys would decide, and then it would like dominoes, right? And then the last 2-3 years, it's like in hours, it's over. So if you're restricted, do you tie up your money in John Collins only to have the Hawks match, only to find out then after 2 days that all the other top free agents you would have gotten are gone? So that's the challenge with Collins getting the max from someone else. Are they going to type their money in an offer sheet? So then you look at, there are teams that might not be worried as much about, like, okay, if we don't get a free agent, then we'll use our cap room like to make trades, like how the Pistons did, et cetera. So there is the possibility that a team that isn't as worried about getting the top guys and can afford to make that risk, like a non-playoff team, might be willing to make that kind of offer. If you're the Hawks, like, how do you let Collins go? Because you can't really replace him. Maybe you could get to about $19 million in cap room if he leaves, but that's assuming that Dunn opts out, or maybe you could trade Dunn, which I don't think would be hard if they needed to compensate a team to get Dunn off their books. They could get to about $19 million, but that's not a lot of money.
Right.
You're not going to get a player as good as John Collins in most cases That's not, sometimes teams are really smart and get really lucky and see.
I think John Collins is incredibly underrated offensively. I think we know about his defensive deficiencies. He can't play the 5. We would prefer him to play as a 5, as a ultimate role man who can kind of be a Swiss Army knife and shoot. But I think due to his defensive deficiencies, even though he's made improvements and strides in that field, he just hasn't gotten there. And he needs another big next to him. I think he'll end up getting the max, but I think the Hawks will probably try their best to squeeze him as much as they can. But I guess the question that we should ask ourselves is, who do we think the Hawks see as their core? Obviously we got Trae Young. I think Clint Capella is there as their core. DeAndre Hunter is there. Cam Reddish is probably outside of that conversation. He's trying to make himself into that conversation. And then you've got John Collins, who I think a lot of people think that he's a part of their core, but I'm actually not completely sure that the Hawks are completely sold on him being a part of the core. Who do you guys you got Kevin Huerter as well, who's gonna have another payday. I think Clint Capella, I believe he's not extension eligible this year. I think he'll be extension eligible next year if I'm right.
So you mentioned their core. I think Bogdanovich is part of that. I think
absolutely. Bogdanovich is
hurt,
absolutely,
obviously hurt to start the year. I don't know if Danilo is a part of that core. I think that they got a good veteran with the money they had, with the idea that they could probably trade him down the road, which is why his last year is only partially guaranteed, which makes a contract much more valuable in trade. It's almost 22 million, a little bit less, and it's only 5 million guaranteed. So he has a full guarantee next year. We're talking about the 2022-23. So I do think they have a trade piece there. I don't know if there's a market for him right now that would justify the return, but these are the kind of questions, if they do go down this road, they could let Collins go. They could look to trade Gallinari and then go after someone with cap room, if you think outside the box a little bit. But let's say that they do want to commit to that core. The question is how much, right? Well, I think the how much really depends on the market. And when you start saying, the market, who has the money? And when you say who has the money, who also needs either a 4 or a 5, depends on what you think of Collins. I think offensively, he's a modern era 5, and defensively, he's probably a 4, but he's not really great because when you're a 4, you have to guard wings. And I don't know if Collins is great at guarding wings. And if he's not able to guard bigs, but then there aren't a lot of bigs in the league anymore. So is that a problem? So those are the kind of questions teams are going to ask. And so you look at Charlotte as the clear, we need a center team and we have cap room and we're going to go get a center.
Yeah.
So are they going to, their list of options, so to speak, would be Andre Drummond, as far as unrestricted free agents, Montrezl Harrell, if he opts out, or Rashawn Holmes. So those are the unrestricted guys. Andre Drummond makes a lot of sense because, defensive center could fit right in. You can argue that. I would argue that Holmes will be cheaper, but that, and the thing about Holmes is that the Kings only have his early bird rights. And so they can only pay him basically about $10.3 million, and they can't spend $1 more. Of whatever that number ends up being, call it 10-3. And so if he thinks he's going to get 20, which I don't know if he will, but if he thinks that and they can only do 10, then he's going to look around. And if Charlotte's willing to do 15, there's nothing the Kings can do about it unless they're trading away guys to get cap room, and they're not going to do that for Rashawn Holmes. So I think there's an easy path for the Charlotte Hornets to get Rashawn Holmes. I don't know what Drummond's going to want to do. The chance to play with the Lakers and LeBron, there might be reason for him to stay in LA. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on that. We won't get into that now. And then Montrezl Harrell, I feel like is a reserve, a really good reserve, but I don't know if he's a starter. And so now we get to the restricted guys. So this is Charlotte doing their homework, right? We need a center. Who can we get? Maybe Andre Drummond, maybe Rashawn Holmes, maybe Montrezl Harrell. By the way, they tried to get Harrell, Holmes, and Drummond previously in the last year. Charlotte did. They tried to sign some of them or trade for some of them. So we know that there's some interest in those three names, Drummond, Holmes, and Harrell. We don't know about the rest, but there's three restricted guys of note: Collins, Jared Allen, and Lauri Markkanen. So I think everyone in the league is sort of penciling in Jared Allen with the Cavs, that they'll match and they'll keep him. And I don't know if anyone's going to go crazy, because he's good, but he's not necessarily a max guy anyway. You're not going to go crazy for Jared Allen. I don't think Lauri Markkanen stays with the Bulls. I think that's going to be a relationship that breaks up. So Lauri's kind of in a similar position as John, where it's like, what position is he? And then you have John. So if you're Charlotte, are you making a run at a restricted free agent like Collins, Allen, or Lauri? Going back to the question that, like, if you don't get one of those guys, then Drummond's probably gone by then, and Holmes might be gone by then, and now your backup plans are gone. And that's just Charlotte. You start going down the list, and it's like, well, there must be other teams that have cap room that need a center. Well, the Bulls might have cap room, but they don't need a center. Dallas, they have Kristaps Porzingis. Unless they move Kristaps, they don't need a center. Now, maybe they look to make a change. I'm not going to assume any team right now moves a core piece. They might. Right. And every year some teams break up their core, like the Magic broke up their core, right? But we couldn't predict that ahead of time because we didn't know that that was something on the table. I'm not going to assume that Porzingis is out. But I'm going down the list and I'm like, well, they have some cap room, but like they don't really need a center. How many teams really need a center? Like Miami might have a lot of cap room. They don't need a center. They got Bam Adebayo. Right? Toronto is definitely on that list. I'm going in order. You could say the Knicks, and we talked about that a little bit. So we could say Charlotte, New York, Toronto, and I think, Orlando doesn't really have cap room. And I think, like, if the Suns have cap room, it's because Chris Paul left and they have DeAndre Ayton, so they're not going to spend it on a center, presumably. There's one more team we left out, is San Antonio. Right? So San Antonio, New York, Charlotte, and Toronto. Did I repeat one?
Toronto.
No, yeah. So you have four teams that probably, so if you just think about Pirtle. Right. So, like, are the Spurs committed to Pirtle starting? And maybe the answer is yes, and they don't use their cap room on a center. Now we're talking three. So I don't know. I can tell you right off the bat that the Raptors definitely need a starting center. But I also know they tried to trade for Dennis Schroeder. And the way that if they move on from Kyle Lowry, do they want to replace him with a guard and stick with what worked with Fred, a 2-guard front, a 2-point guard front? Maybe that's their priority, and maybe they'll go with role players at center, or maybe they'll just play Fred at point with Malachi Flynn backing him up, and keep Gary Trent Jr. playing him at the 2, OG at the 3, Pascal at the 4, and put their money into a center. These are the kind of questions we don't have answers to, and questions that the Hawks don't have answers to. But we've kind of set the table of, like, there's only 3 or 4 destinations for all of those centers that we talked about, not just John Collins, right? Unless a team is willing to restructure, rebuild, right? Like, there's always trade. You mentioned Miles Turner earlier, so certainly Miles Turner could get into the mix. Like, I could see the Spurs trading for Miles Turner with their cap room. I think Miles Turner is a great fit for the Spurs. But I've heard, whispers that maybe Lauri Markkanen is a target. You know what I mean? So, like, there's only so many teams that A, have cap room, that B, need a center, and that D or C, I don't know, I've lost track of my letters, that are going to go after someone who's restricted, when maybe they should go after Drummond or a cheaper guy in Holmes who you can get, right? Like, the Kings can't pay him more. It's not a decision anymore, right? It's not like Drummond is like, well, I could take the mid-level from the Lakers for 10, or maybe I can go somewhere else for 20, but the Lakers can pay me, like, he would get 9.5 to stay 1 year with the Lakers, and then the next year, if he took early bird, he could get probably like 17 million starting. And maybe if you think about it that way, maybe if they win a title, that's enough reason for him to stay. I don't know. LeBron holds a lot of sway, right? Who knows? But Holmes, the Kings, they can't keep him. They can't pay him more unless they're trading core pieces, which, again, I'm not going to make any assumptions unless I have intel that a team is trading away core pieces. So when we circle it all the way back to the Hawks, I feel like there may not be a great market for John Collins unless there's a team, like we mentioned, that has cap room that maybe we're not seeing. Maybe they don't. Maybe the Raptors think that John Collins with Siakam and OG is a winning combination, and if it doesn't work out, they'll be all right. Fine, we'll go to the next player, and we're willing to take that risk. And now there's a market, so you need just one suitor for John Collins. Because he's restricted, I'll say that it's less likely that comes. And so, but it's not a great list of centers. So,
right.
My only concern with Atlanta, though, is that they have a lot of money tied up. They have, they could, of course, pay him next year. But with Bogdan, with Clint, they'll have to pay Trey in 22-23 as well. Depending on how Kevin Huerter plays over the next year or so, he may be someone that they have to pay as well. So would they have even the cap room to pay him max salary? Or do you say, I'm going to sign him to a max now and I'll figure it out next year? I don't know.
I'm glad you brought that up, because with a lot of those decisions coming up, this might be their team moving forward. And with that being said, if that's the case, they won't be able to have a lot of movement or space to get to that next level if they top out as a 3 seed or maybe at best a 2 seed on a lucky year, So I think with that being said, they do have to. I don't know if they're going to be able to pay everyone. And I think they'll have to make a tough decision between Cam Reddish and Kevin Huerter when the time comes. But I think John Collins ends up staying for sure.
Right. So, it's a good question, Chanel, and that's really how teams have to think about it. And it's really easy to just plug in the math for this year and not think about the scope. And that's what you're doing. You're saying, well, Trey's going to get paid, and he's going to get paid for the 22-23 season. But as we kind of talked about earlier, they had some foresight in that with Danilo Gallinari. Yeah, they paid him a lot of money, but that last year is the same year as Trey's first extension year. And so that 21.5 million drops off to just 5 million. They probably trade him by then and get something back. And now, okay, fine. You've got Collins, let's say at the max or close to it. Let's say it's 23 million starting, ramping up. So maybe you're paying him 25 that year. So now you're paying him 25, and now you're paying Trey the max, assuming, right? But you're paying Bogdanovich 18, you're paying Capella 18, and you've got to make some decisions also with Huerter, who's actually due for that extension. His extension is actually this offseason as well. So when we get to this offseason, one of the first things we're going to get, in my opinion, will be a max extension for Trae Young. But it's going to take a little bit longer, probably, for them to figure out what they're going to pay Huerter. And I think they should pay him, but I don't know. It depends on what the market is. It depends on what his agent is demanding. But they're going to have to take all that into consideration. But they can get out of Bogdanovich down the road. I think he's valuable enough. And we talked about Danilo. Reddish, I think he still has to play himself into value, similar to someone like Obi Toppin. Reddish has a little bit more time in the league, but he's been hurt a bit, and he hasn't really shown it yet. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It takes time. They have Okongwu, who needs to prove his worth as well. So they've got some pieces. They've got if Dunn opts in, which I think he would after a down season. That now that's a piece that you can trade. So if you're trading Gallinari at 20 million, you're trading Dunn at 5, Reddish at 5. That's 30 million. You can get anybody in the league with that amount of outgoing salary. And some teams might want Gallinari because his contract is very favorable down on the last year. You can get some young pieces. Maybe you can get Okongwu with that. Maybe you can get some. The Hawks have their own first. They have a Thunder first, but it's probably not going to convey. So it'll probably convey as seconds. So it's maybe someone would want that as a potential first, but they do have their own first. They don't have the best draft capital, but they're not in a negative position. So they do have some of their own first to offer. They have some good young pieces. I don't know how much of their core they'd be willing to give up, but I think by our logic, probably Reddish and I don't know what Okongwu. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
And Bruno Fernando, there are pieces that they could even move Herter if there was the right opportunity. If they didn't want to pay him and there was a team that needed a nice multi-purpose guard who's good at a bit of everything. He's a good shooter. He gets steals. He gets assists. Decent enough on rebounds. Like, there's nothing that he doesn't do particularly well. I don't know if he's a great defender yet, but he's a helpful piece. And so I like the Hawks and where they're at. I like their potential. I think keeping Collins is the right move, because even if you don't want to keep him long-term, you're better off keeping him and then looking to trade him down the road as a valuable piece than letting a valuable young forward leave for no reason. And if you want to nickel and dime him and make him go the offer sheet route, so be it. And maybe he doesn't get an offer and maybe you save a few pennies. Maybe it's a few million, maybe it's worthwhile. Or maybe it's better for everyone's sake for you to give him what he's asking for, or as close to it as possible, so that you can have a positive environment around this developing core.
Sometimes we've seen guys who, I think of the Gordon Hayward situation when he entered restricted free agency. The Jazz were just like, hey, just go get an offer, and we're not going to pay you right away. And that left, I don't think Hayward liked that at all.
Right.
And, if you nickel and dimes a guy who thinks you're, they're a part of the core, if things really pop off and Collins turns into a superstar and he comes up on the next payday and, maybe he decides to leave, but that's another situation.
I'll just throw in, like, you have to figure out how you're going to be an offensive team.
Yeah.
At the core, like, how are we going to get our points? And then round them out with role-playing defenders. And so keep Collins and figure it out around the margins how to play defense around him. And if you're going to say, well, we're not good enough offensively, you want to make some changes there, fine. And you don't want Collins because you don't like him offensively. But I view him as too valuable for this team. It's okay to be too good offensively. It's very rare when a team is like the Grizzlies of some years back, where it was like their defense first, and we're going to get what we can get from Conley and Gasol, and we're going to have no one else who can score. We're going to try to beat teams like 89 to 87. That's just not how the NBA is. And when you've got a high volume, high scoring, fun playmaking guard like Trae Young, surround him with offensive players in the core, and then round it out with good defensive players. That's why Solomon Hill is so valuable to this team. You can get Solomon Hills. There are guys like that who would love to be on the Hawks, to be on a playoff team that's young and to come in there and to be a mentor. Just go in there and play hard, get minimum contracts, stay in the league. Why not? I mean, that's the way to go. And so if you're losing John Collins because you don't like him defensively, I think you're missing the boat.
Absolutely. I completely agree. So with that being said, I wanted to ask you guys, as the season starts to wind down, the way that we look at the season, and what we're kind of studying and researching kind of changes, whether we're looking at young guys, whether we're looking at playoff teams, whether we're looking at scheme, strategy, all that kind of stuff. Chanel, what are one or two things that you're looking at going into the last part of the regular season?
I'm just really looking to see kind of what teams, I guess, are going to finish off the season with. So, like, are they going to just give it up? Like the Pistons, are you just going to just leave young guys in and play them? Are you just going to, commit to, trying to get that first round lottery pick? Or are you going to try to let your guys play to win, to develop for next season? Just kind of seeing what happens. And also just trying to see, in terms of rumors, what players, free agents are valued at. Obviously, you and I both want to be agents. And so just kind of looking at, what are the rumors? What are teams saying? What are Shams and Wojs of the world? And even Eric, what are they saying? And how are they valuing players? So that's what I'm really looking forward to as the season winds down.
Absolutely. What about you, Eric?
Well, I'm in LA, so part of my coverage is the Lakers, and so it's obviously when does LeBron come back? How LeBron is he himself? We're seeing AD is back. First game looked rusty. Second game looked a little better. He was out longer than LeBron, had a little bit more delicate of an injury. LeBron's injury is a little bit more straightforward. Just, a high ankle sprain isn't great, but it's not crazy. Whereas AD had like a calf / near Achilles injury. So I'm curious to see what the Lakers do. I'm curious to see how the plans work out. That's obviously something new, and not everyone's a fan of it. I think Mark Cuban's criticisms are valid, and I think it's even valid him saying his opinion after the fact, because everyone voted, yeah, let's do it. But now the point he made is like, I don't think we all recognized that, like, the rush season, the compacted season means more games in fewer days, and because we have more teams who are actively fighting as opposed to resting, top and bottom, because like if you were comfortably in the 6th seed, you might not need to fight that hard, but now you've got to make sure you don't fall to 7. It changes how teams approach the stretch run. Like, if you think about, like, so the Spurs and the Grizzlies are tied right now as of this recording at 31 and 29, right? So if you're Denver, you're not going to fall out. You're at 21 losses. Yeah. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you don't care about home court enough, and maybe you want to rest Jokic a little bit down the stretch. Like, you might have a different approach now. Or the Lakers at 25, like 25 losses, like they're going to have to push it to make sure they don't drop back a little bit. Dallas is on that wire, and I get why Cuban's upset, because it just so happens to be hitting his team, and he feels it a little bit more than some of the other squads. Like, Denver doesn't hit them as much, but it definitely hits Dallas, who would love to rest Luka and get them ready for the playoff run. And yeah, they need to stay ahead against the Grizzlies. They're up, or the Spurs, they're up by two losses. I always look in the loss column when you're doing a playoff chase, and if they get to a certain number, 3 or 4 losses, and then you look at tiebreakers, and it's like, okay, we could rest the last few days. Well, maybe they can't now. Maybe they got to make sure they don't finish. They got to finish ahead of the Blazers now. So anyway, as far as the offseason, I've spent a lot of time. As soon as the trade deadline is over, I process everything that's happened, and then I look ahead. And Chanel, we've done this together before. You look at a team and you map them out. Who are they? What is their cap position? And then you look at their depth chart, and you try to identify who are their core players. And for some teams, it's easy. LeBron is a core player for the Lakers, right? Like, Giannis is a core player. Middleton's a core player for the Bucks. Like, you start going down the list, but we won't know because we don't have the intel. Even the Shams and the Wojs don't have all the intel to know that Vucevic is going to be dumped by the Magic at the deadline. But we do know that there are some core players who are coming up on contracts soon, and that they could, there's always speculation on Bradley Beal. Because his team hasn't been winning. Well, now they're winning, and now they're going to be a playoff team. And I know that the Wizards don't want to trade Bradley Beal. They have no intent to trade him, and why would they? He's a great player. And if he wants to be there, they won't do it. But we touched on Cat. Well, Cat, he's under contract a long time, but the Wolves are terrible. But James Harden, he was in a bad situation. He had multiple years, and he wanted to go. Rockets didn't have to move him. They moved him because it was a bad situation. So there are all these kind of funky predictions that we're going to try to make. Some of them are obvious. We have, where does DeMar DeRozan go? I don't know where he goes, but we know it's either San Antonio or somewhere else. We know that factually. He either stays in San Antonio or goes somewhere else. Maybe he retires. I don't think he will. But odds are probably 99% that he's going to play on one of the 30 teams in the league next year, right? So we can go down the list. Who has the money? Just like we did with John Collins. You just look at each individual situation. And if you do each team and you do each free agent, you can kind of get a sense. And so I've spent probably the last month huddled down in this pandemic trying to process all this. So I feel like I have a good sense of what the topics are. What the actual decisions are, that's a different story, because that it's real. It's we don't know what individual human beings are going to do. We can't say what Kawhi is going to do, right? But I look forward to that knowledge. So you ask what I'm looking forward to. All right, Clippers, show me. Are you going to fall apart, or are you going to get to the second round? Are you going to get to the third, conference finals? Are you a finals team? If you lose in the finals, okay, I think Kawhi's like, okay, we made some progress. You lose in the first round, now maybe Kawhi's like, I don't know if I'm in the right spot. I don't know, but maybe he wants to live in LA so bad he doesn't care about that. There are factors that we don't know. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm more of an off-season, guy. That's what my coverage is and my job is sort of projection. So, but all of these elements of the regular season factor into what happens next. And then the last tiny little thing is, of course, the draft lottery, which will determine so much for the Timberwolves, the Warriors.
Yeah, the Warriors, yeah.
And any team that the Warriors might trade with, if they want to stay in contention and move some of those young pieces,
right?
They get the Minnesota pick and Wiseman and some of their other young pieces. Now suddenly, they're a team that could go make a run at Cat or make a run at Beal or make a run at anybody who's a good player, who's a team wants to change their core. The Warriors are going to be there and they're going to have the pieces to do it. But if the Wolves get a top 3 pick, then the Warriors don't get that pick. Now they have Wiseman, but they don't have, and they do have a Wolves pick in 2022, but it's not the same as a pick right now to get Suggs, Kuminga, Jalen Green. You're not going to get Cade Cunningham with 4 or 5. I left out Mobley from USC. There's pieces out there that if there's 4 or 5 great prospects, and if you get the 4th or 5th pick, and you get a shot at one of those 4 or 5 guys, that might be really, really valuable for the Warriors. Not necessarily as a player, because they don't need any more young guys. Maybe they do. Maybe they need to rebuild. We could debate that. But if they're going to stick with Steph and stick with Clay when he gets back, then maybe they need to move some of these young pieces. So that lottery is just about everything.
Yeah. And to finish off this conversation, I would say that for me personally, I love to spend the last part of the season really diving into a lot of the young guys that are getting opportunities that we wouldn't see otherwise during the regular season. So this guy, Michael Porter Jr. has been a fascinating player. Unfortunately, I've just been really bummed out. I feel like every game that I watch, I see an injury. It's just, it's been a hard season for fans, for players, for everyone. And it's just, I feel like a lot of the fun has just been sucked out of the season. But with that being said, I think I really want to see Michael Porter take the next step with Jamal Murray out. See him soak up more isolation possessions, more possessions as a pick and roll ball handler. See him create and just really kind of find his way into star status. And then next is Wendell Carter Jr. He's kind of taken that leap in Orlando, and it's been really nice to see him kind of regain his footing in the league, dealing with so many injuries, and finally see him starting to gain his confidence. So that's been really nice. And obviously with the playoffs coming up, super excited to see, a potential Bucks, Nets matchup. That would be lovely. I think I'm just really excited to just kind of dive into the strategic part, for example, like I know the Bucks have been, busy changing up their scheme defensively, and they've been doing a lot of experimentation. So it's been really nice to see them. Obviously, they haven't won as much, and it's been due to the fact that they have been experimenting more. But I think that experimentation is going to really help them in the playoffs, I should say. Switching more, and when you want to switch a lot against the Nets, you want to either take Harden, Kyrie, or Durant, or you want to take Drew, Giannis or Middleton. And I think we all know who we would take in terms of if you want to play a switching scheme. But there's a lot of really fun stories out there, and I'm just excited to see the young guys blossom. So yeah.
Right.
So Eric, I really appreciate you coming on. Also, check out his YouTube channel because he has some really awesome YouTube streams on there. I've learned a lot so far, so I really appreciate you doing that. And thank you again. I really appreciate you coming on.
No, hey, Chanel, I love you. It's been great seeing you succeed, and I look forward to what's next. Ali, thank you for hosting and bringing me on, and I wish you success in what's next as well. Keep me posted and reach out to me if you need help anytime. So, and anyone listening, you can find me on Twitter at Eric Pinkus, EricPinkus. Reach out, say hi, ask questions, don't be shy. And I do, you'll see at least one of my most recent videos pinned to my Twitter feed, so you can get to my YouTube channel that way. So I've got to do some new content. I've been so busy analyzing. I feel like I'm just coming out of it now with like a real sense of what's next. So I'll be doing some videos on that.
Awesome.
Can't wait to see those.
Yeah, we're excited. All right, y'all. Take care.
All right, thanks for having me.